homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. Today I'm going to show you what we did on Saturday, which is we made apple cider, homemade fresh apple cider. And this is a home-built apple cider press that is from the guy who did the Wizbang stuff. And so I'll put links to all of this below. And I have a really old video on this on my other channel, my actual farm channel, Miles Away Farm, that practically nobody has ever seen. But this is an updated version of this. I love this cider press. It uses a garbage disposal, a repurposed garbage disposal to grind the apples so that you don't have to hand crank. I literally spent, I still look for them. I probably spent 20 years going to estate sales hoping to find an old hand crank cast iron cider press in somebody's garage or somebody's barn that had been sitting there for 50 years and was not in perfect shape, but that I could get for a good deal, and then I could do my own cider pressing. And you can buy them new. Lehman's has them. But I could never find one used that wasn't way out of my price range. And what I kind of finally realized is those hand crank iron ones, they're really cool looking, but they're a huge amount of work. And also they're cast iron a lot of times, which rusts. And so they take quite a bit of maintenance. And I saw this idea for repurposing a garbage disposal to do the grinding part. And it's just absolutely brilliant. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. And honestly, I picked this garbage disposal up at a Habitat restore, and I think I paid $5 for it. And then randomly, we happened to have the right sized motor. You have to take the original motor off and put a bigger motor on them in order to make them work. And so because my husband had bought this random lot of stuff at a big warehouse clean out sale, we had this motor that turned out to be the right size motor for what we needed. And so the only part of this that I actually had to buy in order to make this part of it work was just this little spindle. A lot of the plastic parts that are in this Wizbang press, I did actually buy from the guy who does the Wizbang stuff because they're food grade plastic and it just made sense instead of trying to make them out of wood. But I'll show you how that works. And then future videos are going to include, we're going to do some hard cider. So I'm going to actually ferment some of this apple cider that we made for hard cider. And I'll show you a little bit of canning it. I still got quite a bit of apple juice canned from a previous year, so I'm not going to do a lot of that, but I'll do a couple quarts of it just so that you can see what that process looks like. In order for it to be shelf stable, you can also freeze it, but you can't just throw it in your fridge and have it sit there for very long. Because it's a fresh cider and it has all the natural yeasts and bacteria that are just on the apples, it's going to ferment pretty quickly even in your fridge. So you've got, 4 or 5 days in your fridge before it starts to get fizzy and starts to ferment, or you need to freeze it or can it. And by canning it, you heat it, and that kills everything that's in it so that it's then shelf stable. So I'll show you that. And then I'm also going to do apple cider caramels. This is an old Smitten Kitchen recipe that's just so good. And so every couple of years I make this as a Christmas gift for people. And so we'll show you apple cider caramels. And then apple cider vinegar. I'm going to show how to do apple cider vinegar from fresh apple cider instead of apple scraps. So yeah, we're going to have a whole series of videos on what to do with fresh cider. These apples came from my friend at Flateau Farms, Paul and Sue at Flateau Farms. They are up north of us near Pasco, and she and I met at farmers markets, and we've been friends for many, many years. And so these apples came from her farm, and they are what's called seconds. So these are apples that have a little bit of damage. They've got a little bit of scarring on them. They've got a bird peck, not majorly damaged, but a little bit of damage so that they can't be sold as firsts. And so I got a great deal on these, and I got 60 pounds of those. And then I had another probably 10 pounds from a friend who was the one who actually inspired this, because she had some apples from a backyard apple tree and she wanted to process them. And I offered to do cider making, not realizing that she probably only had about 10 pounds and that this cider press, in order for it to be completely full and actually work really well, probably needs about 35 or 40 pounds of apples to do the pressing. I didn't have much of an apple harvest here on the farm this year. We do have several apple trees. We have a Honeycrisp, we have a Liberty, we have a new Gala that isn't very big yet, and I think it's a Williams Pride. And for whatever reason, we had a really funky spring this year. And even though the trees bloomed, I just didn't get much in the way of fruit set. So very, very little in the way of apples here on the farm. And so I just went ahead and bought apples from a farmer friend, which is definitely the way to go. But this is a few of the few apples that I did get. So this is a Liberty apple, and this is one of only 2 Honeycrisp apples on my Honeycrisp tree this year. So one tiny little apple. So not much coming out of Miles Away Farm, but we live in abundant apple growing area. Washington State is known for its apples, and so we have many, many, many other options when my own trees don't do well. Fresh apple cider, it is the most delicious thing in the world. Let's get started. Video, there's just going to be like chunks of apple flying by.
Effective rain, apple fallout.
So I think the entire process from whole apples to juice took us about 2 hours for 70 pounds. So this process actually goes pretty quickly, especially when you have 4 people doing the work. This is the ground pulp, and I'm putting it in a cut-off 5-gallon bucket. And I can't remember the height on this. My brain says 3 inches, not 100% sure, but it's what was recommended in the book that I got when I built this thing. And then it also is what works with these special nylon sheets that you can fold around the pulp. What we're doing here is, instead of using the stays around the outside of this apple press to hold the pulp in, we're putting them in nylon bags, and we're making little, basically kind of like cheese wheels. And so the pressure, when it's applied here, is actually going to go onto those nylon bags instead of on those wood stays. And that means that the wood part of this machine is really just there to kind of keep everything contained. It's not under a lot of pressure. And this way you can apply a lot more pressure to the actual pulp and get a lot more juice without wrecking the machine. So it's a fabulous design. In between each one of these layers, you put a disc. That disc does have a small hole in it, and then obviously the juice can just roll off the surface of it. But we're putting discs in between, so we're stacking these. And again, this is going to make the ability to apply a lot of pressure. We're going to get very, very dry pulp at the end of this, but with no pressure on the outside of that ring. It works fabulous. You can see we're getting quite a bit of juice even before we start to press. And then the press on this is actually just an old car jack. We slowly, you don't want to go too fast here, open this up, and it applies pressure down through those discs and onto those wheels of apple pulp, and we get lovely, lovely juice coming out of this.
All right.
And basically, we end up maxing this out, so we get to a point where we basically can't go any further down. We did end up adding an additional chunk of wood on the second pressing here so that we had a little bit more leeway. Holes in that vertical pressing board are so that you can put wood dowels in there to hold it up, but mine is tight enough that I don't really need the dowels.
The first pressing.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Salud.
Ding, ding, ding. Navasco.
Nice. Thank you.
Yummy.
Pretty yummy.
Hot damn. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Surprising, isn't it?
That's really good.
It's really good.
Tastes nothing like the store-bought nastiness. This is so much better.
Yeah.
So as they were doing the second pressing, I started to filter the juice that we had, and it'll start out pretty green, and then as it oxidizes, it will turn brown. This is totally normal. Don't be alarmed by that. But I'm using obviously a strainer here, but then a permanent coffee filter because it's a very fine mesh strainer, and that's going to catch any additional pulp that we missed when we were doing the pressing. So it's just a nice way to filter out any little bits and bobs that might be in there. Sunlight through the juice there.
Pretty.
And then here's the second pressing. You can see we've got a third additional board in there so that we can go a little bit further down on the second round. Look at that liquid gold coming out of there. And I didn't get an exact measurement, but I would guess we got between 8 and 10 gallons from this pressing. These big pots that I'm using are 5-gallon, 6-gallon pots.
Cheers, everybody. Cheers. Salud.
Salud.
One of the nice things about having animals in this situation is nothing goes to waste. And so all of this pulp just got put out for the chickens and the turkeys and the ducks, and it was completely gone within 3 or 4 hours. This is the best day ever. So many thanks to my friends Laura and Joy for coming out, and for my husband for doing some camera work here. It was a wonderful October Saturday making apple cider. I hope you guys found this helpful, and links below on equipment. Thanks for watching, Tribe. Look forward to upcoming videos on what to do with all of this cider. I have new videos coming out every week.